Soon, the room was heavy with a charged stillness, as if bracing for the weight of impending revelations. Matthew stood tall, his posture firm despite the uncertainty hanging over him. Nearby, Sarah Evans Holland sat quietly, her gaze fixed on him with quiet concern. At her side rested the basket of triplets, a poignant reminder of the stakes at hand. The lawyer, seated across from them, leaned forward, his pen gliding methodically over his notepad as Matthew recounted the events in painstaking detail. His words were deliberate, each one carrying the gravity of a man desperate for clarity. When the story concluded, the lawyer removed his glasses and addressed Matthew with solemnity. "All right, Matthew, our first step is to initiate the legal process for paternity confirmation. This requires requesting DNA tests to establish your biological connection to the babies. While the situation is extraordinary, we must approach it decisively." Matthew's brow furrowed. Decisively? What does that mean in this case? The lawyer's voice remained measured. Because the infants were left on your property, you are obligated to notify the authorities immediately. It's a legal requirement to ensure the children's welfare. The words landed heavily, their implications settling over Matthew like a leaden weight. He nodded slowly, his mind racing to process the responsibilities now thrust upon him. "So I have to call the police?" he asked, his voice laden with reluctance. The lawyer confirmed with a slight nod, his expression unwavering. Breaking the tense silence, Sarah finally spoke. Her voice, though soft, carried a quiet authority that cut through the room like a clear bell. "I can't explain it," she began, her tone steady, "but it feels like the rules we create to define justice sometimes miss the essence of what it truly is. Real justice doesn't always need laws to protect what's right." Her words lingered, reverberating in the space between legal jargon and moral reflection. The lawyer paused, his pen hovering midair, as if the weight of her statement had momentarily stilled his thoughts. Matthew turned to Sarah, her insight piercing through the haze of logistics and obligations. For a brief moment, her clarity illuminated the path ahead, one-lined not just with legal battles but with the unyielding resolve to protect the innocent. Matthew Jones Coleman stared at Sarah Evans Holland, visibly affected by her words. Her calm conviction filled the room, cutting through the tension. Across from them, the lawyer hesitated mid-note, acknowledging the weight of her sentiment with a contemplative pause. Matthew exhaled deeply, dragging a hand through his hair, disheveling it in frustration. The fragile quiet of the moment shattered abruptly as the unmistakable hum of patrol cars pulling into the driveway broke through the stillness. The flashing blue and red lights seeped through the expansive windows, painting the walls in waves of pulsating radiance. Though the sirens were silent now, their presence was deafening in its implication. Matthew sprang up from the couch, his expression a mix of disbelief and panic. Beside him, Sarah tightened her grip on the basket, clutching the triplets, as if her arms alone could shield them from what was about to unfold. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes brimming with unspoken defiance. The front door burst open with a sharp crack, revealing 2 uniformed officers and a social worker. Their purposeful strides carried an air of authority, their presence both resolute and unyielding. "Mr. Coleman," one of the officers began, his tone steady yet weighted. "We're here to take custody of the children until their legal status is resolved." Matthew stepped forward instinctively, his frame taut with resistance, as if his sheer presence could block their path. The social worker, a middle-aged woman with tired but empathetic eyes, raised her hand in a placating gesture. "We understand how difficult this must be, Mr. Coleman," she said gently, "but until paternity is confirmed, the children need to be placed in institutional care to ensure their safety." Safety, Matthew's voice cracked with disbelief, simmering anger threading through each word. "What kind of safety can you offer them away from me? They were abandoned here, left in my care. I'm all they have right now." Sensing the growing tension, the triplets' cries rose in unison, their tiny voices shattering the strained silence like glass splintering on a hard floor. Sarah instinctively began to rock the babies, her own tears shimmering unshed in her eyes. Her voice wavered as she spoke, thick with desperation. "You don't understand," she said, her words a plea. "These babies don't need strangers or a cold, unfamiliar place. They need love, warmth, people who care." The second officer, less patient, stepped in, his tone firm. "Sir, this isn't up for debate. It's standard procedure." Matthew turned toward the social worker, his voice dropping to a low, fervent tone. His anguish resonated with each syllable. "Look at them," he said, his eyes imploring. "They're just days old. Do you honestly think separating them from the only people who've cared for them is what's best? Is that what justice looks like?" Sarah's voice cracked as she pulled the triplets closer. "Please," she whispered, her plea trembling in the air. "These children deserve more than rules and protocols. They deserve love. Don't do this." The social worker hesitated, her eyes drawn to the crying infants. For a fleeting moment, compassion softened her stance, but the weight of procedure quickly returned. With a deep sigh, she extended her hands toward Sarah. "I don't want to cause you more pain," she said softly, "but this is protocol." Sarah stepped back, as though her defiance could stop what was inevitable. Matthew moved to her side, his presence steady yet filled with barely restrained fury. "Listen to me," he said, his voice trembling with emotion but resolute. "I'll prove these children are mine. Whatever it takes, I'll do it. But if you take them from me now, you're condemning them to unnecessary suffering." The suffocating silence that followed was punctuated only by the babies' cries, their echoes filling the marble-lined room. Matthew held the basket tightly, his hands shaking with the effort to remain composed. He stepped forward, halting just shy of the social worker. His voice, now steel, cut through the moment. "I'll fix this," he declared, his resolve unwavering. Quickly. The social worker, visibly regretful, nodded and took the basket. The babies' cries softened only slightly as they were carried toward the door, their voices fading with each step. Matthew and Sarah stood frozen, watching as the red and blue lights flickered across the tear-streaked faces of the triplets, their tiny figures disappearing into the night. The door closed behind them, and the mansion grew unbearably quiet. Matthew sank back onto the couch, his hands covering his face as though trying to erase the scene from memory. "This isn't over," he whispered, the words barely audible in the vast emptiness of the room. Sarah Evans Holland stepped closer, her hand resting gently on Matthew Jones Coleman's shoulder. Though her touch was soft, it radiated a quiet strength born of resilience and compassion. "You're not alone, Matthew," she said, her voice steady yet tender. "Don't forget that." Matthew turned toward her, his composure wavering. His voice cracked as he spoke, his vulnerability laid bare. "Please, Sarah, tell me what your grandfather would say right now." A serene smile graced Sarah's face, and her voice softened, imbued with the wisdom she had carried since childhood. "My grandfather would say," she began, "that adversity is the forge where brave hearts are shaped. No matter what is taken from you, as long as love remains in your soul, every battle lost becomes a step toward winning the most important war. He'd remind us never to let despair keep us from fighting for what's right." Matthew pulled her into a tight embrace, their shared grief and determination melting together in the moment. Tears flowed freely, mingling as they held on to one another. Finally, with a renewed sense of resolve, Matthew stepped back. A spark of determination flickered in his eyes. "Come on, Sarah," he said, his tone lifting ever so slightly. "Let's head out on a shopping spree. It's time for some new skirts. You can't keep wearing the same clothes." Sarah laughed, the sound light and full of hope, cutting through the weight of their shared burden. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the corners of Matthew's mouth lifted into a genuine smile. Matthew Jones Coleman's voice carried a quiet authority as he said, "I won't let you leave my house. I need you here with me." Sarah Evans Holland tilted her head, a playful smile lighting up her face. Why skirts, of all things, Mr. Know-It-All, she asked innocently. Matthew's response came unexpectedly, his words slipping out like a confession. Because your legs are the only thing that can take my mind off the pain in my heart, he admitted, his tone unguarded and sincere. Sarah stepped forward, pressing a tender kiss to his forehead. Her embrace followed, warm and reassuring, offering solace in its simplicity. The luxury boutique they visited later gleamed with soft, ambient lighting. Each spotlight showcased the refined elegance of the clothing on display. Matthew sank into a plush velvet chair, his gaze fixed on Sarah as she floated in and out of the fitting room. Each time she emerged, she was draped in a different ensemble of skirts, blouses, and heels, her poise captivating. "How does this look?" she asked, stepping out in a chic black skirt paired with a crimson blouse that perfectly accentuated her figure. She spun lightly, the fabric twirling gracefully around her. Matthew couldn't hide his admiration. Resting his chin in his hand like a discerning judge, he offered her a smile filled with warmth. "You look absolutely stunning," he said, his voice softened by genuine appreciation. "You're my favorite model, Sarah, the cover star of the magazine in my heart." Sarah chuckled, brushing his comment aside with a light laugh. She retreated back to the fitting room, ready to try on yet another outfit. From his seat, Matthew watched her with a mix of tenderness and relief. For the first time in days, the heavy cloud of recent events seemed to lift, replaced by fleeting but cherished moments of normalcy. Afterward, they found themselves at a secluded table in a quiet restaurant. The twinkling city lights of San Francisco stretched out before them like a tapestry of stars. Sarah was midway through savoring her pasta when a thought suddenly struck her. She looked up, her face a blend of embarrassment and urgency. "Matthew, I completely forgot about my beetle," she blurted out, her voice tinged with concern. Matthew raised an eyebrow, setting his wine glass down. A flicker of amusement played across his face. "That rusty old thing," he teased, his grin widening. "I'll buy you any car you want." Sarah's smile faltered slightly. She shook her head, her expression softening with sentiment. "That rusty old thing was my grandfather's car," she said quietly. Her voice trembled at the edges, carrying the weight of a cherished memory. Matthew's expression shifted instantly. Her words hit him like an unexpected wave, silencing him for a moment. He looked down briefly, his throat tightening. When he finally met her gaze, it was with a determined light in his eyes. "I'll take care of it right away," he said firmly, his voice resolute. Reaching for his phone, Matthew continued, "I'll call a tow truck and have it taken to the best repair shop in town. I want them to restore it completely and make it look brand new." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, her gratitude shining through her expression. A smile, warm and genuine, spread across her face as she leaned slightly toward him. "Thank you, Matthew," she said, her voice full of sincerity. After a beat, her playful spirit returned. "You're such a wonderful human being and my favorite know-it-all." Matthew chuckled at her teasing, but the affection in her tone lingered, deepening the bond between them as they sat amidst the glow of the cityscape. A few hours later, Matthew Coleman's sprawling mansion felt emptier than ever. The absence of the triplets, now in the custody of the authorities, left the luxurious estate hollow, its grandeur overshadowed by an aching void. Matthew and Sarah Holland sat together in the expansive living room, their shared sadness palpable, cloaking the space like an invisible fog. Neither spoke, their silence heavy with unspoken worry. The stillness was broken by the sudden trill of Matthew's phone. He glanced at the screen and quickly answered. It was the detective. "Mr. Coleman," the detective began, his tone measured and professional, "we've confirmed everything about the clinic's error." Matthew gripped the phone tightly, his breath shallow as he listened. "The clinic admitted to a mistake during the implantation process. Your sperm sample was unintentionally used for a patient who intended to conceive children biologically hers and her husband's, who was African American. When the triplets were born, clearly Caucasian, the error became undeniable." Matthew closed his eyes, inhaling deeply in an effort to steady himself against the tidal wave of emotion surging within. "And the mother?" he asked, his voice low but firm. The detective's answer was deliberate, almost apologetic. "The biological mother is the same woman who brought the triplets to your home. Our investigation revealed she was furious when she realized the error. She and her husband left the country that same day, seeking alternative reproductive options in Europe. It appears she has no intention of returning or pursuing custody." The words hung in the air, each syllable carrying a weight that seemed to press down on Matthew. After the call ended, Matthew immediately contacted his lawyer, his mind racing with possibilities. "Matthew, this changes everything," the lawyer said after hearing the update. "With the biological mother now out of the picture and no claim from her or her husband, the case hinges entirely on proving your biological connection to the triplets. A confirmed DNA test will be the key to securing custody." Several days later, the chill in Matthew's office felt almost oppressive. The usually warm and vibrant space seemed to mirror the tension in the air. Matthew stood before Sarah, her presence a quiet anchor amid his internal storm. She wore a stylish new skirt, her demeanor calm but her eyes filled with concern as she observed him. Matthew's hands were clasped tightly together, his knuckles white with the strain. His gaze remained fixed on the sealed envelope sitting on the desk between them. "Are you not going to open it?" Sarah asked gently, her voice barely above a whisper. Matthew shook his head faintly, his eyes never leaving the envelope, as though it contained not just information, but the answer to a question that could redefine his life. "It's strange," he murmured at last, his deep voice trembling with the weight of his emotions. "It feels like everything I am rests inside that envelope." A few hours later, Matthew Coleman's mansion exuded a profound emptiness. The absence of the triplets, now in the care of authorities, left the opulent home feeling hollow, stripped of its warmth and purpose. Matthew and Sarah Holland sat silently in the grand living room. The air around them felt heavy, laden with the weight of uncertainty and sorrow. Breaking the stillness, Matthew's phone rang, shattering the somber quiet. He answered quickly, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. On the line was the detective. "Mr. Coleman," the detective began, his tone clear and professional, "we've confirmed all details regarding the clinic's mistake." Matthew tightened his grip on the phone, his breath catching slightly. "The clinic admitted to an error during implantation," the detective explained. "Your sperm sample was mistakenly used for a patient intending to conceive children biologically hers and her husband's, who was African American. When the triplets were born, clearly Caucasian, the error became apparent." Matthew closed his eyes, exhaling deeply as he tried to process the revelation. "What about the mother?" he asked, his voice low but firm. The detective hesitated briefly before continuing. "The biological mother is the same woman who left the triplets at your mansion. Our investigation revealed that she was furious upon discovering the mistake. She and her husband left the country that same day, heading to Europe for alternative reproductive options. It appears she has no intention of returning or claiming custody." The words hit Matthew like a thunderclap, both clarifying and complicating the situation. After the call ended, Matthew wasted no time dialing his lawyer. The urgency in his tone conveyed the weight of the update. "Matthew, this is a game changer," the lawyer said, his voice laced with cautious optimism. "With the biological mother out of the country and no custody claim from her or her husband, the case hinges solely on proving the triplets share your DNA. The odds are now in your favor." Days later, Matthew's office felt uncharacteristically cold. He stood before Sarah, her calm presence grounding him as he wrestled with his emotions. She wore a chic skirt that reflected her poise, but her expression was soft with concern. Matthew's hands were clasped tightly, his knuckles white as he stared at the sealed envelope resting on his desk. It seemed to hold the power to define his entire world. "Are you not going to open it?" Sarah asked gently, her voice barely more than a whisper. Matthew shook his head slightly, his gaze fixed on the envelope as though it might detonate with the slightest touch. "It feels strange," he finally murmured, his voice trembling under the weight of his words. "Everything I am seems to rest in that envelope." He hesitated for a long moment before finally reaching for the envelope, his hands trembling as he tore it open. The sound of ripping paper seemed deafening in the quiet room, amplifying the tension between them. Carefully, Matthew unfolded the document, his eyes scanning the printed lines with growing urgency. Suddenly, his hands froze, the paper quivering visibly in his grasp. "What does it say?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle yet filled with anticipation. Matthew let out a sharp exhale, as though releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Closing his eyes for a brief moment, he reopened them with a spark of emotion that lit up his face. "They're mine," he whispered, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable strength. Sarah raised a hand to her mouth, tears spilling over as she stepped closer, collapsing into his arms. "They're my children," Matthew repeated, his voice steadier now, as though each word rooted him in this newfound truth. In that moment, the weight of uncertainty gave way to an overwhelming sense of purpose. A month later, Matthew stood by the large windows of the mansion, gazing out at the horizon. His posture was resolute, as though finally grasping the magnitude of what he had fought so tirelessly to achieve. Sarah, radiant and composed, stood nearby. Her elegance was effortless, her calm presence a quiet strength beside him. Across the room, their lawyer flipped through documents with meticulous care. His furrowed brow showed concentration, but his occasional glances at Matthew carried a mix of curiosity and hope. The sound of the doorbell shattered the stillness, reverberating through the mansion like an announcement of destiny. Matthew and Sarah exchanged a look, a ripple of anticipation running through both of them. "This is it," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with both excitement and nerves. Matthew didn't respond. Instead, he moved toward the door with deliberate steps. Though his face was composed, his posture betrayed the storm of emotions within. Pausing at the door, he took a deep, steadying breath before opening it. The movement was controlled, but his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the handle. Standing on the threshold were two uniformed officers and a social worker. In her arms was a basket, from which the soft cries of babies emerged. One of the officers stepped forward, speaking with respectful gravity. "Mr. Coleman, we are here to deliver your children." For a moment, Matthew froze, his heart pounding wildly. His hands trembled as he reached out for the basket, his emotions threatening to spill over. Inside were the triplets, their tiny cries piercing yet grounding. As their small bodies were placed into his arms, Matthew felt as though the world had stopped spinning. Sarah, tears streaming freely, rushed to his side. Without hesitation, she carefully lifted one of the babies from the basket, cradling the tiny figure as she rocked gently. "They're so small," she whispered, her voice breaking with awe. "So perfect." Matthew, his eyes never leaving the faces of the babies, exhaled deeply. His voice, soft and reverent, broke the silence. "They're mine. They're my children." Sarah turned to him, her gaze filled with love that seemed to radiate from her very being. "I wish they had been born from me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I love them, Matthew. I love them as if they were." Matthew's expression softened, and a new determination lit his features. Adjusting the basket in his arms, he met Sarah's gaze with unwavering resolve. "That's something we can make happen," he said firmly. Sarah gasped, her heart pounding as tears of joy streamed down her cheeks. A radiant smile broke through as she took a deep breath, letting the moment wrap around her like a warm embrace. Her voice, trembling with love and emotion, finally broke the silence. "Yes, of course, yes," she exclaimed, the words escaping in joyful bursts. "And Matthew," she added with a soft laugh through her tears, "when I saw you pushing my car that day, I thought to myself, the handsome, cocky guy is going to be mine, even if I have to hike up my miniskirt just a little." The room erupted in laughter. Even the lawyer, who had been a silent observer, couldn't suppress his chuckles. Finally breaking the moment, he grinned and said, "Well, I have to admit, this is, without a doubt, the most heartwarming case I've ever handled." Laughter filled the space again, the sound of joy uniting them. It wasn't just a celebration of their legal victory, it was the birth of something much more profound, a family. Still smiling, the lawyer added with a playful tone, "Matthew, Sarah, you've won more than just a case today. And for the record, I'm officially nominating myself as the best man at your wedding and the godfather to those adorable triplets." Now, they were truly a family. Sarah glanced at Matthew, her expression glowing. "As my grandfather always reminded me," she said softly, "a true home isn't built with bricks or wealth, but with patience, love, and the willingness to share your soul with those who matter most." Matthew turned to her, his voice warm with admiration. "Sarah, even as a model, you've stayed completely true to who you are." Her smile deepened, her eyes sparkling with gratitude. Matthew gestured subtly to the lawyer, who rose with a knowing grin and crossed the room. From a nearby shelf, he pulled out a magazine, flipping to reveal its cover. There she was, Sarah Evans Holland, radiating elegance and confidence in a stunning golden miniskirt and high heels. The photograph captured her poise and beauty so vividly, it seemed to leap off the page. Matthew's gaze softened as he turned to Sarah. "I wasn't exaggerating when I said you're the cover model of the magazine in my heart," he said tenderly. "Fantasy magazine isn't just any publication, it's the most renowned in the city, even across the United States. And you, Sarah, are now officially our star model." Her breath caught as tears welled up in her eyes. Overwhelmed by emotion, she broke into a beaming smile. "Now," she said, her voice thick with sincerity, "I want to be your pregnant model for the most successful edition of your career, my love." Matthew's eyes gleamed with happiness as he looked at her, the joy in his gaze reflecting hers. Together, they shared a vision of a future filled with love, laughter, and family. With their triplets soon to return home, and the lawyer grinning beside them, their bond felt unshakable. It was more than a legal triumph, it was a declaration of the life they would build together, one rooted in love and commitment. In this heartwarming story, we witnessed the transformative power of love, perseverance, and family. Matthew, a man who thought he'd never have children, faced an unimaginable twist of fate when 3 abandoned triplets were left in his care. Alongside Sarah, whose strength and compassion never wavered, they navigated legal battles, emotional hurdles, and life-altering decisions. From uncovering the truth behind the triplets' origins to solidifying their bond through mutual trust and unwavering support, the journey wasn't just about claiming paternity, it was about creating a home filled with love and hope. The story reminds us that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by the sacrifices we make and the love we give. Matthew and Sarah's journey wasn't just about finding answers, it was about discovering their purpose, building a foundation for the triplets, and choosing to walk life's path together as a family. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video. Your appreciation helps us continue sharing meaningful stories like this one. Subscribe to our channel to stay updated on more heartfelt narratives that inspire and connect us all. We'd also love to hear from you. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts about this story. What part resonated with you the most? Have you ever experienced a moment where love and courage transformed your life? Your words not only help build our community, but also encourage others to open up and connect. Lastly, don't forget to share this video with friends and family who would appreciate its powerful message. Together, let's spread the values of love, resilience, and hope. Thank you for being a part of our journey.